Hello guys, Reza here. Welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to continue with our Marvelous Designer for Beginners series, and the focus of this video is stitches. Now, stitches are a great addition to Marvelous Designer, and I believe in Marvelous Designer 10, the company introduced a couple of new tools as new additions to the stitches category. Now, I could have easily squeezed that topic into making a pillow tutorial or how to create a balaclava tutorial. But again, the whole idea is just to gradually but surely add to what we already know in Marvelous Designer. So far, we've learned so many tools. I think this session is the right time for us to kind of take things to the next level and talk about detailing. Now, once we get that topic out of the way, we can probably start with a full garment on a character. Now, with stitches, there are many ways of doing this. You can take your model into ZBrush and add stitches. You can use Adobe Substance Painter to draw your stitches and get the normal map out. Or you can create the stitches inside Marvelous Designer and export it as a geometry. Now let's introduce the scene first. As usual, I'm just going to walk you through what I have at the moment. So basically, I picked a corner of a denim pair of jeans because we have an area, an excuse to learn about the tool. The way that I modeled it is actually very simple. I've got a 2D pattern which has been frozen, so it basically keeps the fabric in place. I have the base fabric, the underlying layer, and a layer on the top with some additions, and I stitched them all together. So basically, if I go in here to edit sewing tool, you can see I sew this pattern to here and then sew this one to the underlying pattern. And again, it all comes down to what you do next. So it's just a lot of sewing. This 2D pattern will go on top of here. These two, I sew them on top of each other. Same thing with these guys. And then with regards to, for example, this pattern, you can see I sew them all together. This pattern. So if I select them, you can see this is the outer layer and I've got an inner layer and I stitch them together. Same thing is happening here. I've got an outer layer and inner layer and I stitch them together. Same as here, outer layer, inner layer, and stitch them together. If I reset the workspace really quick, just to quickly show you what I did with the fabric as well, I've got a lightweight fabric which I duplicated. With the duplicated fabric, I gave it denim jeans light. And if I bring the texture really quick, so that's the texture that I came up with. It's just a simple sort of seamless jeans texture, which I desaturated in Photoshop. And then I have another one, which is more of a richer, more vibrant denim jeans color. So the lighter one has gone to the duplicated version, and I use that for the lighter areas just to give it this piece a little bit of style. For the second one, I use the richer, more vibrant color. As for the preset, I gave both of them denim lightweight preset with, there is really not much to it. High roughness, and that's pretty much it. If I were to simulate this, you can see the fabric holds up beautifully. So there's not much movement around, and that's the whole idea behind double stitching those pieces. If you always want to kind of keep a fabric in place, for example, I've got this side pocket, if you want to keep that in place, then make sure to use double stitching. But of course, I have these lines But I can easily go in there, hide the internal lines. It would be really nice to have the actual representation of the stitch on each piece. And that's the whole idea behind this tutorial. I've got all the landmarks ready to go. All I need to know is how to put the stitches on the fabric. Very, very useful, and I'm pretty sure any type of garment you create, at the end of the day, you do need that tool to really add realism to your work, and it's basically part of detailing. All right, without any further ado, let's get to it and see how we can use this wonderful tool in Marvelous Designer. Okay, before we dive right in, let's have a look at a few references to identify what we exactly want. So this type of stitches is called pick stitch. And no, I didn't know about it. I had to look into that and do some research, but that's the type of stitching that we're looking for. Not too much distance between each stitch. It's very simple, straightforward. And I'm particularly keen about the color as well. Looks very stylish. I could have gone with a simple, boring white color, but I think with a kind of bluey, rich, vibrant pair of jeans, yellow or gold sort of a color is going to be quite elegant and looks quite stylish. So that's the type of look that I'm gonna go for when I start with the scene. All right, here I am inside Marvelous Designer. To start with the tool and navigate the tool, we have the actual tool, and that is, if I go in my 2D pattern, we have all the tools that we need for our stitches. It's a Topstitch drop down, which you can just tear off the menu and bring it to the side. Now, once you apply your stitches, you need to get to the attributes. The way you get to the attributes is by toggling from fabric to top stitch. Now, this top stitch window is going to specify or define what type of stitch are you going to use. Is that going to be a geometry stitch? Is that going to be a texture stitch? What color, how thick, how long? So you can define that via here before you apply the tool, or you can apply the tool and then select your stitches and change it via here. It really doesn't matter. I have a tendency to define the stitch first, and when I select the top stitch that I define, any stitch I create will be made based on the newly created top stitch. Hope it makes sense. So I'm just going to go add, and I'm just going to call this top stitch jeans, right? So I know that from now on, whatever I create is not going to be a default top stitch. It's a kind of non-destructive way of working. At any point of time, if you feel like you made a mistake, you want to go back, you still have your reserved default top stitch to go back to, and you can just switch to default top stitch and delete any unused top stitches. So I'm going to go with that, and I'm not going to make too many changes right now. I just wanted to create a new one and apply the Topstitch jeans to my model. Okay, with that out of the way, let's see what type of tools are available to us. We have segment top stitch, free top stitch, and seam line top stitch. I don't know, maybe it's me, but it really reminds me of sewing tools. If you haven't watched the video on sewing tools, I highly recommend you that. Now, I used sewing tools to sew those 2D patterns and sew my fabric, but we have edit sewing, segment sewing, and free sewing. So if you know how to work with sewing tools, then it makes it 100 times easier to work with Topstitch tools. All right, let's get to work. First one is segment top stitch. All you need to do is just to click on a segment and Marvelous Designer is going to apply Topstitch to it. Simple as that. For example, I'm going to, with the segment Topstitch Tool selected, I'm going to zoom in, and let's say I want to apply Topstitch to these two segments. All I need to do with the tool selected is to click on it. And there I have it. If I zoom in, it's really faint because we haven't changed the attributes yet, but you can see the top stitch has been applied. I can select and click on the second line, and we can see we have the next top stitch applied. And every time you apply top stitch, that segment turns pink, a very sharp, vibrant pink color, showing that there is a top stitch assigned to that segment. That's how segment top stitch works. Let's say I want to delete it. You have two ways of deleting it. First one is to go to Edit Top Stitch, select your top stitch and press delete. The next way is to zoom in, right click on the top stitch and just say delete. It's surprisingly easy. All right, let's explore free top stitch. As the name suggests, you can just freely apply stitching and define start and end to your top stitch. Let's say, for example, I'm going to hover my mouse over one of these segments and I say click. That's where I want to start my top stitch, and I'm going to drag and click again, and that's only this part that has got top stitch. You just customize the way that you do top stitch. For this one, it doesn't need to be the whole segment. You can start here and end halfway, click, and only this bit gets the top stitch. Simple as that. There are some scenarios where you want to sort of customize the length of your top stitch. Definitely free top stitch will get the job done. I'm going to go to Edit Top Stitch, select both of them and press delete. Now, seam line top stitch is perfect where you have seams and you want to have the top stitch on top of your seam lines where the two fabric gets connected. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just going to select that, and automatically Marvelous Designer enables areas that you can actually draw your seam line top stitch. Now the beauty of it is it will be applied on both source and target 2D patterns. For example, let's say I want to have a top stitch on this line here. It not only applies it on this guy, also on the fabric that has been sewn to the source fabric. So watch how it works. I can click and drag all the way. I'm going to zoom in, hold down Alt, drag all the way to here, and you can see the top stitch has been applied not only in here but also on the underlying fabric. Makes it quite realistic, especially when you have two fabrics meeting in one place and you would like to have the top stitch exactly on top of it. Let's try it here. Click, drag, just gonna hold down Alt middle mouse button to move, drag and click, and there you have your top stitch in here. This is relatively a new tool, was introduced I believe in Marvelous Designer version 10. I might be wrong, don't call me out on this one, but I'm pretty sure that's a new tool. We didn't have it back in Marvelous Designer 4 or 5. So this is very, very handy, and you can see how simple this is to create top stitch. Another really nifty tool is, I'm just going to right click and delete, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to right click on that one as well and delete that one too. Another nifty trick is to marquee select or rectangle select the entire fabric. If you know for a fact that every single segment is going to get stitches, then it's really easy. You go to segment top stitch, and then instead of clicking on a segment or an internal line, you just drag and let go of the mouse, and all the outline 2D fabrics will receive stitches. Remember that this method doesn't include internal lines. For internal lines, you can hold down Shift and add stitches like that. So it's fairly straightforward, and you can see in no time I add stitches to the fabric. All right, that's all you need to know about the tools themselves. But what makes it more interesting is once you add your stitches, how you are going to tweak your top stitches so it matches your reference. So in the next chapter, let's go through these attributes really quickly. Really, there's not much to it, but let's go through it and see how we can kind of take the whole look to the next level. I'm going to basically select all of these guys and press delete on it, simply because I am not going to use stitches like that. I have a reference to go to. So let's start with a correct way on applying stitches and then changing some of the attributes to get a desirable look. Let's start by adding top stitches to the right places. So I'm going to start with this patch right here. I've got 3 patterns. I'm not going to add any stitches on this pattern nor this one, because that goes underneath this top fabric. So probably the only one that I want to apply stitch to is this fabric. Okay, segment top stitch is probably the easiest way of doing this. I can just select and apply top stitches to all 4. Now, before I move forward with other patterns, let's go into Topstitch Jeans with edit top stitch selected and make some minor changes. Well, I already named my top stitch, so no need to change anything. And then I have offset, and that offset adjusts the interval between top stitches on internal lines or pattern outline. So it really doesn't matter what type of segment you are selecting. That's what offset does. I'm going to lower that ever so slightly, so there's a little bit of gap in there. The stitches on the corners, or on the borders I should say, they get closer to the border, and the 2 will be placed right in the middle. Maybe 1.5, 1.7. Yeah, 1.7 is, I think, would be the right number for me. And then we have the type. You can have this as a geometry object. So when you export your OBJ, you will see those stitches as a geometry, or you can have this as a texture. Now, you may say, oh, the texture looks terrible. With the help of specification rollout, I can make them more defined. Now, for the length, this is way too short. I am going to go with a much longer thread. And then for the space, I really don't want to have any space. If you remember the references, I didn't have any space. And with thread thickness, obviously that's where we kind of get rid of that ugliness. Maybe 1.5 is a good one, or maybe 1.6. Yeah, that's better. With that, probably I need to lower this one to 1.4 or 1.8 rather. Yeah, that's better. So 1.8 for the offset, 1.6 for thread thickness. Now, as soon as you change the type from OBJ to texture, then in the texture, you get a customized texture. Now, at any point of time, if you want to change the shape, you certainly can. Just to show you, we have bar tag, which looks weird here, but if you look at here, that's how actually it represents the pattern type of a preset that we have. We have buttonhole. Again, probably the current preset is not the right one for it. We have overlog, we have pick stitch is the one that I'm using at the moment, and we have single, and we have a zigzag. So I am going to go with pick stitch, as I said, and make my adjustments again. So this one I believe was set to 4.2. I did not have any space, and the other one maybe 1.6 or 1.7 was the number that I put in. And that's pretty much it. The rest, it's not really that important. You can, you know, make this reflective if you want. I think it's a little bit of a weird choice. For the color though, I am actually going with the color that I saw in my reference. So it looks actually well defined and quite stylish. Okay, that's it for the look dev side of things. That's how you look at the properties and change them. Let's quickly go in here in the other side of this pair of jeans and see if we can just add a few more stitches. I am looking at here for the pocket. If I select the pocket, definitely I would like to have stitches for the side line. So segment top stitch makes everything a lot easier. So that's that. We've got two patches here. I'm going to add my stitches to the outer patch because we are not going to see any stitches that goes underneath this layer right here. For this, I am probably going to apply that to the entire patch. So I'm going to select that, and it applies that to all of the pattern outlines. For the internal ones, I just need to select them manually and get the job done like so. You can actually zoom in, make sure it's all good. Now, one thing that may catch you off guard is usually when you simulate, sometimes your top stitches may disappear. If that happens, don't freak out. As soon as you deactivate your simulation, they'll be back. But in my case, it really did not happen. It happens sometimes. Maybe it's a glitch, maybe it's intentional, I don't know. Just so you know, this is normal if that happens. All right, I'm gonna go in here. I'm not going to apply any stitches in here because that fabric, if I just select that, is in here, so there is really not much can be seen. What I really would like to see is stitches on this pattern right here. So again, I am going to go with segments top stitch and select every single line, simple as that, and that really should do the trick. There's one underneath, I got that one done. Maybe one on the top, it's not really that visible, but let's go with that as well. And that really should do it. So you can see how quickly you just add style to your fabric and it looks great. You can have more than one top stitches. You can have one with white color, you can have one with a thicker thread, and just apply it to certain areas that you like. Then you can see instantly you get a slightly different result, and that's part of the process. If you need to do that, then so be it. You just spend a little bit more time and customize it the way that you want to customize it. So that's pretty much it. That's how you approach stitching inside Marvelous Designer, and there's really not much to it, and it comes down to what sort of look you like, and look at your reference and try to match your reference. But in a nutshell, that's how you apply it. We are going to practice more of that in the future with more intermediate or advanced tutorials. I am going to throw in one more addition to this, and that is buttons, because every single gene we looked at, they had buttons, and we have an ability to add buttons. It's very straightforward. Again, that topic will be expanded in the future where I talk about male and female garments, but for now it's just a simple button. We don't need any buttonholes, we don't need to fasten the button or anything like that. So let's have a look at that as well. Throw in a few buttons into this pair of jeans and wrap up this tutorial. Okay, let's create buttons. To create buttons, you have two options. One is to go to Material, and then you have Buttons. You can tear off the menu, bring it to the side. We are just going to use Button, and we can move it using Move Button. We are going to talk about the rest of the tools later. Just so you know, if you would like to access Topstitches, it's from the same menu. So you go to Material, and then we have Topstitch, and then we have Topstitch Tools along with their shortcuts. Now, one way of doing this is to use drop-down menu. The other way of using it is to hover your mouse here, and you have pretty much the same tool set. I can tear off the menu, bring it to the side. We have two more commands, register button and register buttonhole. We are going to talk about them later, but that's how basically you can access them. Now, before I insert any button, I am going to go to the button window, very similar to what we did with Topstitch, and I'm going to add a button. The reason I'm doing this is if something goes wrong, I haven't changed the default button. I have just an additional button which I can easily remove. So I'm going to call this button jeans. Great. Now, I'm not really worried about the size and the color right now. We know that we can change them in one go later on, but let's create one. Actually, I want to put two in here, and I want to put two in here. You can use your 2D pattern, you can use your 3D window. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to use my 2D pattern because it gives me a slightly more accurate result. So I'm going to put one here, and I'm going to put one here. Now, here's the thing. Most of the time, the button inserts itself in a really weird position. The way you fix it is by using Select and Move button. You select the button. Now, that gives you the gizmo to move and to rotate. But also, if I hold down Alt and start moving the button, you can see it actually aligns itself along the geometry's normal, which is pretty helpful. I can let go of Alt, let go of the mouse, and reposition it this way. So that's one way of doing it. I can select the other one as well, and holding down Alt, reposition that ever so slightly. I can go to button and insert two buttons here. So I'm going to go in here, insert one button here, and insert another button here. I can do the same thing, go to Select, Move button, holding down Alt, just on the button, ever so slightly move it here, and selecting here with single click, holding down Alt, and start dragging, bringing the button here. Again, there's nothing wrong with selecting and going W or E to use rotation or move tool, but I found this much easier just to realign the buttons. All right, job is done. I'm going to close the button window. Let's go ahead and tweak the actual button jeans that we have created. Now, the shape is obviously completely out of place. So I'm going to click in here and scrolling all the way, probably 3 snap Revit number 4 would be a good one. Yeah, that's very close to what I want. Width 20, obviously it's massive. I'm going to reduce it to something like 10. Yep, that's better. And now with this size reduced, I probably now can revisit the location of the buttons, but let's get a more accurate representation and see how we go. For the thickness, if I just have a quick look, Yeah, they're slightly thicker than I imagined, so probably 3.2 can be better. And the weight, we're just not going to touch that. Now for the material, obviously it's not fabric, it's going to be metal. That's better. And with the color, I'm going to go a coppery look. Just for now, I can tweak it later. Opacity set to 100. With roughness, I can just give it a slightly higher roughness, so it's not really that reflective. And of course, metalness is set to 100 since we picked metal as its type. Just the color needed a little bit of adjustment. Okay, I'm gonna go to select move button, and I'm going to start moving these buttons with the Alt held down. This one is good. Alt and start moving it until you're happy. Alt, moving it ever so slightly higher, and lucky last, Alt, and that. Again, if you think that the color is not right, if you think the shape is not right, you can always go back and change those. The beauty of this is this workflow is quite non-destructive. This means that I can go to button genes and say, I can go in here and say, all right, this look probably wasn't the look that I wanted. I want to change it to something like that. And then you can start adjusting some of these values and get a much better result. All right, that's how you add buttons to your garment as well. Again, there's more to that. We are going to discover that later, but that should do it for this session, and that should do it for this tutorial in general. We had a lot to talk about, and again, we added another layer to what we already know about Marvelous Designer, and that gives us more ammunition to produce quality results. I hope you found this video useful. You can follow my Twitter and see all the work in progress and projects, and of course you can support this channel via my Patreon page if you wish to. Download this scene, it will be on my follow along Patreon tier. Thank you again, I really appreciate your support. Until the next video, see you guys later.